I have 100% proof that God is real from a single word in the scriptures. But we'll get to that in just a moment. One of the main criticisms that atheists have against the Bible is the supernatural aspects of the Bible. They don't like the concept of creation. They don't like fire falling from heaven. They don't like the Old Testament prophets. They don't like Jesus' resurrection. And they sure don't like the miracles. And they claim there is absolutely no evidence for any of these supernatural things to have happened. But I want you to think about the double standard here for a moment. When it comes to other historical works where there is zero proof that the work is about, there is no grave, there's no lineage, there's no background, but let's just say there's a historical work that talks about person X, and I'm sorry I don't have anybody on the top of my mind. But as this person is mentioned, so many times we'll just incorporate them into history because they were mentioned in a text somewhere without any other proof. But with the scriptures, the atheist immediately, because something is outside of their experience, they say this cannot have happened. This is supernatural. The supernatural cannot happen. And so the Bible is not allowed to share with us. But it's actually, the evidence is actually the Bible itself. It was so important that men were like, we need to record this. This is too amazing of a fact to pass up. You've got to understand this. You've got to hear this. So I'm going to make a case for you today that the Bible writers were either so incredibly brilliant that you should follow everything they wrote because they are master craftsmen of describing reality and making things look so real that you should follow them because they probably have a really good grasp on life, or that the Bible is true and you should just follow the scriptures. So when it comes to making things up, let's talk about a few dynamics. When you make something up, the made up fact, the lie, is the main point. So for instance, when someone says, okay, we're talking about King Kong. King Kong came from the underworld, blah, 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 and King Kong is 100 foot tall. Well, that 100-foot tall statement is part of the main focus of talking about King Kong. And if someone comes along and says, I could bench press 400 pounds, their main thrust, their focus is, I can bench press 400 pounds. And they're trying to impress that upon you to influence you, to persuade you, to sell you on something, maybe to make their image look good or whatnot. But again, the main point is the main focus, especially if it's something that's created. And here's kind of how the dynamic flows. Christians will say that miracles help to confirm that Jesus is God. And that makes good sense. If God or if Jesus could do miracles, then it helps confirm that he is God. And Christians say this, but atheists will go, you bunch of dummies. Don't you know that the Bible was written by men who just created a whole bunch of stories, and they created these fairy tales, or maybe even the fishermen at first. They just made up these stories so that people would believe them. And so they made up the concept that Jesus did miracles. And so that should be their main point. Now, to push this further, it's not just your main point, but it's also what you focus upon. It's your drama, the energy, the intensity. So for instance, your fortune tellers and your TV preachers and your healers and your health and wealth people, they've got to focus on something stellar and amazing to keep selling you on what they have. And that's the way the atheists view Christianity and the way they view the Bible. And one other thing that we need to consider, if something is true, Then it's going to have incidentals, is what I would call it, that comes along with it. So if someone really can bench press 400 pounds, then there should be some incidentals that prove that. And so a lot of times when people, tell me that, I go, oh, okay. So tell me about some of the other things, like, how are you on the fly? What's your poundages like on the fly? And they go, oh, yeah, well, I do 3 sets of 12 at 50 pounds on the machine. The incidentals there don't quite line up. If somebody is bench pressing 400 pounds, then to get over on a mechanically advantaged machine and only be able to do 50 pounds for 3 sets of 12, kind of tells on them. It kind of tells that they can't bench press 400 pounds. So anytime you talk about the incidentals, like making up a miracle, then the other parts of the story, if it's fake, they should clash against it. But if it's true, there should be some incidentals in the text that point this out, that say, hey, not only was this true, but it was affecting reality around it. And so let me jump into what I'm getting at here. Is one of the things is that Jesus wouldn't do miracles to prove that he was God. When people would come up to him and say, hey, do a miracle for us. Why don't you, show us a sign or a wonder and we'll believe, we'll follow too. And just like, no, I don't think so. Not much has changed. Even people today are like, oh, Jesus, all you do, God, all you do is speak to me, show me a miracle, do this, that, or the other. Jesus hasn't much changed on that. He's like, no, I'm not doing miracles to prove anything. So that's really interesting that one of the main claims of atheism against the Bible is, oh, all these miracles are made up to prove that Jesus is God. But then the Bible writers knew that that might be the claim against them before they wrote. These ignorant people, how could they even think this stuff up? And then all of a sudden they were like, well, we need to get the incidentals right, because if they're eventually going to claim that these miracles are made up, then Jesus should be able to deny miracles, and that would help prove our case. You see how the incidentals matter here? But in the scriptures, miracles are many times not even the focus. There are times miracles are the focus. The resurrection. Yeah, Jesus came back to life. That is the focus. That gives us hope. That gives us life. It has true meaning and merit. But there's so many times that the miracle isn't the focus. I want to walk through a small passage with you, and if you're scripture averse, this might be a little hard, but I'm just going to read a couple of verses, just a couple of verses, and I want you to hear the story here. This either masterfully crafted story or truth. I'll let you decide. It happened that when he, Jesus, went into the house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees on the Sabbath to eat bread, they were watching him closely. I'm in Luke 14. And there in front of him was a man suffering from dropsy. And Jesus answered and spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Now, this is one of those things where all the incidentals just happen to be lining up. If you are familiar with this passage, the chapter before, Jesus was in a synagogue. There was a woman that was bent over. She had been crouched over for years and she couldn't stand upright. And Jesus healed her in front of everyone, in front of a synagogue leader or a Pharisee official of some sort. And they got to see that Jesus could do miracles. That was a past tense. All of a sudden, the story, present tense, is referring to a past tense story. Now, this is easy to do if you're talking about truth. If I am recalling truth of a very similar instance previously, it's easy to get all the details right. But if I'm fabricating, who would have thought to fabricate on top of a fabrication? But anyhow, so this is what they were talking about, and they had set up a trap for Jesus. Here was the trap. Jesus walks in the door. Like, why is he getting invited to the Pharisee's house for a meal anyway? This was a trap. Now, why would you set up a trap for a person that's just doing fabrications. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Now, if Jesus really was doing healings, then this whole context makes sense. If he's doing healings there, well, let's catch him in the act. But it doesn't make sense to try to catch him in the act for something he wasn't really ever doing. All of a sudden, Luke here, the writer, is a master craftsman of making stuff up. Like, how did he get all these incidentals correct? So the whole thing is about a trap to catch Jesus healing on the Sabbath. The healing is the sub-point. You've got to understand, this isn't even about healing. It's not about a miracle. That is the sub-point. It is not the point. It is actually when he was healing and whose authority did he have permission to do this? Did he have the permission of the Pharisees, or did he really have permission of God? That is the main crux and focus of the text, is when and Jesus' authority. Specifically, Jesus' authority. The healing is just a incidental sub-point. And let me show you how incidental. And here's where I was promising the one-word proof. Let me show this to you. So Jesus said, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they kept silent. And he took hold of him, this kid with dropsy, or whoever had the dropsy. He took hold of him and healed him and sent him away. There's your big, fat, made-up, sales point miracle. All it just said was Jesus healed him. One word, healed. Like, if you're trying to impress people, if you're trying to sell snake oil, if you're trying to round up followers, you need to say, well, Jesus put his hand on this person, and all of a sudden the energy in the room began to flow, and the candles dimmed as Christ soaked up all the power, and it was transmitted over into this person who was then healed. But no, that's not the way this is described at all, is it? No, the focus is like Jesus healed just like he does all the time. He just did a miracle on the fly, on the cuff, on the go. So I present to you that either the writers of the Bible were the most superb craftsmen of all time who understood the reality of literature and the depth of history so well that they could even write in incidentals, and you should follow them just because they're smarter than you and you wouldn't have known to do that. Or you could follow the Bible because it is true and have Jesus Christ liberate you from your life of sin and shame.